Elena's initial sensation was a sharp agony that prevented her from making a sound. Her wrists were ripped open. She extended her arms above her head. Her cheek collided with the shattered wagon's floors. She was punished by the sun's hammering. She had a cracked lip. The kind of hunger that makes one feel as though their own ribs are twisting against them was aching in her stomach. Tied like cargo, she had been hauled across the desert for hours before being thrown into the back of a wagon that was now lying broken next to a desolate road between Tombstone and Tucson. The men who intended to sell her were dead, their shadows had already been taken by circling vultures, and their bodies were strewn across the sand. She ought to have been relieved, but fear persisted. Nobody would hear her if she yelled. Without a name being said over her, she would perish in the heat if she passed out. Her vision became fuzzy. Her legs trembled as she attempted to crawl. Weak from going without food or water all day, the rope made a deeper cut. She had a taste of blood. Then she heard hooves. From the rise came a rider, a tall figure, in a dust-coated coat, his horse moving. With the patience of a creature that had seen too much of the desert, he stopped to take a deep breath as he saw the wagon that had crashed. He remained still. He just observed the sight, the bodies, and the injured girl reaching for an ancient water trough with her claws. Something that was neither fear nor revulsion caused his eyes to narrow. Like a guy approaching a wild animal that might bolt or collapse, he dismounted and approached her. Because of the sun, his voice was low and harsh. "Now it's simple. You're doing fine. Allow me to remove that rope from you." She let out a cry of anguish that had been building for hours, not fear, as soon as his fingers touched the knot at her wrist. "Slow down," she forced out, her throat trembling. "I'm at my breaking point." Jack would later recall that as the first time she confided in him about her suffering. Well, he froze. In order to prevent her skin from tearing again, he released the tension on the rope by shifting his grasp. He spoke in a steady, even, kind tone. "You are hurt by me. You are now secure. I'll move slowly." The rope became loose. Her arms dropped forward. The sensation shot back like fire, causing her entire body to shake. Before she could reach the sand, he seized her. He carried her to the edge of the trough, raised her as if she were weightless, and lowered her hands towards the water so she could see herself. A girl who should not have survived but did. He didn't inquire as to her identity. He didn't inquire as to what had occurred. "You are coming with me," he said simply. "Nobody is abandoning you in this situation." However, he was still unaware of her captors that he was unaware of. The man who paid for her would come, hunting for blood. If you were Jack, would you still take her from Callaway? Particular location, aware of the peril that lies ahead. "The trail behind you." Jack raised Elena onto his horse as if he has done this 1,000 times prior. However, the reality was that it had been years since he had carried somebody. Throughout, he kept one arm over her, keeping her stable each time the horse. She never once voiced any complaints. She once inquired as to where he was going. She just clung to his clothes, as if it were her final remaining solid world. The yard was silent as they arrived to Callaway Ranch. As Elena slipped forward, Jack sprang down from the horse, caught her, and brought her inside. When she saw the girl, Maeve, the ranch housekeeper who had been familiar with Jack's cowboy love stories since his beard first turned gray, gasped. Above Jack, Lord. What took place outside? Elena was placed in a chair by the cooking stove by Jack. She was shaken once more, but this time it was from tiredness rather than dread. He reached for a cup, poured chilled water from the pump into it, and brought it to her lips. "Drink slowly. Little sips. You've gone too long without drinking." Elena's voice broke as she attempted to say, "Thank you." Maeve applied a warm cloth to the cuts on her wrists and mumbled in a way that elderly women do when they are afraid but are trying not to show it. "Jack, she needs nourishment. She must get some sleep, and since trouble never appears on its own, she needs someone to keep an eye on that door tonight." Jack was aware that she was correct. He couldn't get those bodies from the wagon scene out of his head, nor could he forget how Elena had recoiled whenever he touched the rope. This had been done to her by a dangerous person who would never forget losing what they considered to be their own. Elena's voice was scarcely audible above a whisper when she did speak. I was being transported to Bisbee. A man there would pay well, they asserted. She paused to gather her breath. No one would ever come looking for me, they asserted. Something chilly settled in Jack's chest that he had witnessed unpleasant things in the region, but the way she stated those remarks are more damaging than any outlaw. Western narratives. Beside her, he knelt and maintained his tranquil tone. You're not leaving. Close to Bisbee once more. You were secure here this evening. Elena looked up for the first time. Her eyes were clearer than before, but they were still sleepy. Jack, why did you assist me? You stopped, but why? Leaving you out there would have been worse than whatever that was waiting for me on that route. So Jack shrugged as if the answer didn't matter. Maeve shut the drapes and lit a lamp. As Jack stepped out onto the porch, he looked around the deserted road and listened for distant hooves. The atmosphere was excessively silent and motionless. He was aware of the type of persons that oversaw such operations and that they were tenacious. Elena was too exhausted to touch the bowl of soup she was staring at as she sat close to the table inside. Jack had a question in his heart that he was unable to shake. How far would the owner of that wagon go to retrieve her if he found out she was still alive? The bodies were discovered by Silas Beck prior to the dawn of Old West stories. The wagon tore open, the girl he paid for vanished, and 3 of his men were strewn on the dunes. He crouched down to the tracks, put 2 fingers to the dried blood, and let out a deep growl. A man with the audacity to cut the horses' ropes and take what Silas referred to as merchandise had halted here. All he had to know was that the heat was oppressive over Callaway Ranch by late afternoon. Jack had fixed the south gate, examined the cattle, examined the horizon, and examined the front road again for good measure. He could smell trouble because he knew it so well. Before he saw it, now he could smell it. Elena wanted to help Maeve peel potatoes. However, the fever continued to shake her hands, and she had angry cuts on her wrists, and enlarged. Maeve instructed her to take a seat, encircled her neck with a cool cloth. They said that the girl required 3 days of relaxation before she even considered riding once more. She had a human appearance, attempting to recall the sensation of safety. But each time the wind pushed the shutters, she winced. Jack saw. He was entered and talked softly that you're doing great. Here, you are secure. Maeve bites more forcefully than any criminal in Arizona, and the ranch walls are thick. Maeve whacked his arm with a towel and snorted. Jack Callaway, you shut up. Give the girl a moment to breathe, but none of them had that opportunity. Not that night. It was the dog that barked first. Hi there. Bark warning. Jack reached behind the door and retrieved his weapon. As he slightly opened it, he noticed 6 riders approaching from up the road. Their horses were surrounded by swirling dust. With his shoulder covered and his eyes as sharp as stone, Silas Beck stood in the center. Jack went out onto the porch. Elena remained behind the window, shuddering as Maeve drew her in. 10 feet away from the steps, Silas halted his horse. His voice sounded like gravel being scraped across metal. You took love stories from the Wild West. Callaway, it's something I own. Give her over, and we can put an easy stop to this. Placed the rifle on his leg, pointing at it without setting it down. Either way, you don't own her. You can't use her as a crate of whiskey. Someone killed your men. Else, and you know it. Silas leaned forward in his saddle. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. For her, and I do not leave money laying in the arid region. Jack remained silent. He was just slightly elevated the firearm, just sufficient to cause Silas to move in his chair. The air tightened. Even the canines became quiet. One of Silas's guys jerked in the direction of his holster. Jack was the first to fire, and this time the bullet struck Silas's side deeply enough to knock him partially out of his horse. As he bled through his vest and cursed Jack with each breath, his men pulled him away. The rest scrambled to catch up as he wheeled his horse and thundered off. Jack brought the rifle down. He could see that his hand was trembling slightly. He was aware of what would happen next. With big eyes and a pallid face, Elena emerged onto the porch. She asked one inquiry in a whisper. Now what will happen? Jack gazed at the deserted road leading to Tombstone. Tomorrow, we head into town. Before Silas brings hell back to our door, we put an end to this in front of the sheriff. Let me ask you a quick question before we go on to the next section. If you're still here, get a cup of tea, continue listening, and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are and from what location. Go ahead and subscribe if you want to keep up with the rest of this narrative so you don't miss what comes next. Dawn arrived too early 3 mornings later. When Jack saddled his horse and tied Elena's bedroll behind the saddle, the sky was still gray. She appeared anxious, but she was more resilient than the previous evening. Like a mother dropping off a child at school, Maeve gave her a small tin of biscuits for the road and lovingly pressed her palms. You stick close to Jack, sweetheart. Tombstones can be brutal or compassionate, depending on who notices you first. With a nod, Lena ascended behind Jack. Jack felt the steady yet strained movement of her arm around his waist. For a little period, he placed his palm over hers. You're doing well. We reach the sheriff. We tell him everything and we let Silas be handled by the law. Whispered a faint yes, even though she did not quite believe the law could stand against a man like Silas Beck. It was a long, sandy trek to Tombstone. Giants of saguaro stood in the sunlight like ancient sentinels. Above them a hawk circled. It was strangely serene, the kind of serenity that leads one to believe that trouble has already forgotten about them, but Jack knew differently. In Arizona territory, trouble has a long history. The sound of voices and hammers rolled in their direction as they arrived at the town's perimeter. Men were carrying timber, and Tombstone was awake. Elena was assisted by Jack, who took her directly to the sheriff's office. As Jack described the wagon, the dead men, and how he found Elena, Sheriff Carter listened. Elena then began to speak, first quietly and then steadily. She described how, like a bundle of stolen goods, she had been sold, bound, and transported throughout the region. His pen scrawled across the paper as he wrote every detail. He reclined in his chair and exhaled deeply after she was done. For a very long time, Silas has been skating on thin ice. However, if we catch him first, this will be sufficient to permanently imprison him. The office door creaked as he finished speaking. 2 deputies came running in. Their faces were pale. You had best look at this, Sheriff. They went outside. This time, she chuckled while crying and, I can't take it, I said. Another instance of this joy. A tale that started in terror finished in a house. Based on quiet power and second opportunities. Let me ask you a question now. Had you gone by that damaged wagon? Would you have stopped the way Jack did? Would you have fought for a stranger who was unable to raise her own head? If the tale touched you in any way, give it a like to make it accessible to more people. Prior to you get out, get your tea and inform me in the comments section where you are listening and what time it is for. You're correct.